There's a certain kind of person who will drop everything to help a friend move apartments, who remembers your birthday when you forgot it yourself, who listens to your problem for hours without checking the clock once, and then you catch them alone, scrolling past a mirror, muttering something about themselves that they would never, ever say to another human being, something cruel, something they call out immediately if a friend said it about themselves. But somehow when it's aimed inward, it just passes as normal. Honestly, this is one of the strangest contradictions in human psychology, and once you start noticing it, you can't stop seeing it everywhere. The kindest people you know are very often the ones who treat themselves the worst, not the arrogant ones, not the ones who post confidence quotes and mean them, the quiet ones, the reliable ones, the ones everyone describes as so sweet or such a good listener. Underneath that warmth, there's frequently a running commentary of self-hatred that nobody else ever hears. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who is endlessly patient with other people's mistakes, but ruthless about their own? Someone who forgives a friend instantly for forgetting an important date, but replays their own small mistake from 3 years ago at 2 a.m. like it's a crime scene? That's not a coincidence. That's not just being hard on yourself. That's a specific psychological pattern, and it develops for very specific reasons. Here's where it gets interesting. This isn't really about self-esteem in the way most people think about it. It's not that these people don't know they're capable or intelligent or good at things. Many of them know exactly how good they are at their jobs, their hobbies, their relationships. The issue isn't a lack of self-awareness. It's something deeper. It's a belief, usually formed a long time ago, that their worth as a person is separate from how good they are, and is instead tied to how useful, how agreeable, how easy they are for other people to be around. Let's talk about where this actually comes from, because it rarely starts in adulthood. Most of the time, it starts in childhood, in a home where love wasn't unconditional, even if nobody ever said that out loud. Maybe affection showed up only after good grades. Maybe attention arrived only when a child was calm, quiet, and undemanding. Maybe there was a parent whose moods controlled the whole household, and the child learned, without anyone teaching them directly, that their job was to manage everyone else's feelings before they were even allowed to have their own. Psychologists call this pattern fawning. Most people have heard of fight, flight, and freeze as trauma responses, but fawning is the fourth one, and it's less talked about, even though it might be one of the most common. Fawning is when a person learns, usually very early, that the safest way to survive conflict or emotional danger is to become agreeable, to please, to anticipate what other people need before they even ask for it. It's not really kindness in the purest sense. It's a survival strategy that got mistaken for personality. Can you see how this changes everything? A child who grows up fawning doesn't become an adult who is simply nice. They become an adult whose nervous system has been trained to associate self-worth with usefulness to others. Being kind isn't a moral choice for them in the way it is for most people. It's closer to an instinct, almost automatic, wired in because at some point, being kind was the only thing that kept them emotionally safe. Now here's the uncomfortable part. If your sense of safety and belonging was built entirely around being helpful, pleasant, and low maintenance, then any moment where you're not perfect at those things feels like a threat, not an inconvenience. A threat. That's why people like this can be devastatingly harsh with themselves over what looks like a tiny mistake. Forgetting to reply to a text, saying something slightly awkward at a party, missing a small deadline. To an outside observer, none of that matters. But to someone whose whole identity is built on being the reliable one or the easy one, any crack in that image feels like proof that they're finally being seen for what they secretly believe they are underneath. Not good enough. That's the core belief sitting quietly underneath all of it. Not good enough. Not lovable as they actually are. Only lovable through what they provide, what they fix, what they give. And that belief doesn't go away just because they get older, get therapy, or become successful. It just gets better hidden. Believe it or not, one of the clearest signs of this pattern is a gap between how someone treats other people's failures and how they treat their own. Ask them about a friend who's going through a hard time, who made a bad decision, who's struggling. Watch how gentle they become. Watch how quickly they offer context, compassion, patience. They're going through a lot. Nobody's perfect. You're being too hard on yourself. They mean every word of it, too. Their empathy is real. But turn the mirror toward them, and something switches instantly. Suddenly, there's no context, no patience. No, you're going through a lot. Just judgment. Sharp, immediate, and cruel in a way they would never allow directed at anyone else. Ask them why they're allowed to be gentle with everyone except themselves, and most of them don't even have an answer. It's just how it's always been. It feels normal to them. That's what makes it so dangerous. When something painful becomes familiar enough, the mind stops registering it as pain. It just becomes the background noise of daily life. Here's something that might surprise you. This isn't just an emotional pattern. It's also a cognitive one, tied to something psychologists call the internal critic, or sometimes the inner critic. Almost everyone has some version of this voice. But for people who grew up in environments where love felt conditional, that inner critic doesn't sound like a random negative thought. It sounds like a specific person. Often, without even realizing it, people describe their inner critic using language eerily close to how a parent, teacher, or early authority figure used to speak to them. The tone, the exact phrases, the exact criticisms. It's like an old recording that never stopped playing, just quieter now, running in the background of every decision they make. That's why so many people who seem outwardly confident, successful, even admired by others, still feel like frauds internally. This is sometimes labeled imposter syndrome, but the deeper psychology usually traces back to that same root. If your early sense of safety depended on performance and pleasing others, then no amount of external success ever fully convinces the nervous system that it's safe to relax. There's always a quiet, nagging voice saying, yes, but what they find out the truth about you? Even when there is no actual hidden flaw to find, the fear isn't really about being caught doing something wrong. It's about being caught being ordinary, imperfect, human. Now think about this from a different angle. Why does the kindness toward others stay so consistent, even while the self-hatred grows? Wouldn't you expect someone who feels worthless to eventually become bitter, withdrawn, maybe even resentful toward the people around them? Sometimes that does happen, but often it works the opposite way. The kindness intensifies, almost like the person is trying to prove something, try to earn a kind of worth they don't believe they already have. Every act of generosity becomes a quiet negotiation with their own self-doubt. If I keep being useful, if I keep being good to people, maybe eventually I'll believe I deserve to exist without having to earn it. That's heartbreaking when you really sit with it, because it means their kindness, as beautiful as it looks from the outside, is sometimes coming from a wound rather than from wholeness. Not always. Kindness can absolutely be healthy, chosen freely, without any hidden survival logic behind it. But for a specific group of people, the ones this video is really about, kindness has become tangled up with self-worth in a way that quietly exhausts them, even while everyone around them sees only warmth and generosity. There's a psychological experiment worth mentioning here, related to something called conditional positive regard, a concept introduced by the psychologist Carl Rogers decades ago. Rogers believed that healthy self-esteem develops when a child receives what he called unconditional positive regard, meaning love and acceptance that isn't contingent on behavior. The child misbehaves, throws a tantrum, fails a test, and the love from their caregiver doesn't waver. But when regard becomes conditional, when love visibly increases or decreases based on performance, mood, or convenience, the child's developing brain absorbs a very different lesson. It learns that acceptance has to be earned continuously and can be lost at any moment. That lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It becomes the invisible operating system running underneath adult relationships, friendships, even the relationship someone has with themselves. People raised this way often become extremely skilled at reading rooms, sensing tension before anyone says a word, adjusting their behavior instantly to keep the peace. On the outside, this looks like emotional intelligence, and in a way it is, but emotional intelligence born from necessity rather than choice. It developed because at some point, missing a subtle emotional cue in the house they grew up in actually had consequences. Here's where it gets even more interesting. This hyper-awareness of other people's emotions often comes paired with a strange blindness toward their own. Ask someone like this how they're really feeling, and there's frequently a pause. Not because they're hiding something, because they genuinely don't know. They've spent so many years monitoring everyone else's emotional weather that checking in with their own has become an unfamiliar, almost foreign skill. It's not that they don't have feelings. Of course they do. It's that they were never given permission or safety to actually sit with those feelings and figure out what they meant. This is why self-hatred in kind people often doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It rarely shows up as crying in public or openly falling apart. It usually shows up in small, quiet ways. Overworking, over-apologizing for things that don't need an apology, struggling to accept compliments, deflecting them almost automatically, saying yes to things they don't have the energy for, and then feeling guilty for even privately wishing they'd said no. Difficulty resting without guilt creeping in, as if relaxation has to be earned through exhaustion first. Sound familiar? A lot of people watching this right now are probably recognizing themselves, maybe uncomfortably so. That discomfort is worth paying attention to instead of pushing away. Recognition is usually the first real step toward change, even if it doesn't feel like progress in the moment. Let's talk about why this pattern is so hard to break. Even once someone becomes fully aware of it, understanding a pattern intellectually and unlearning it emotionally are two very different processes. Someone can read every psychology article on the internet about fawning, conditional love, and inner critics and still, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, snap at themselves internally over something trivial. Old wiring doesn't disappear just because new information arrived. The nervous system doesn't update instantly based on logic. It updates slowly through repeated new experiences that contradict the old belief. This is where hope actually enters the picture. Because it does. The brain is far more adaptable than most people realize, something psychologists refer to as neuroplasticity. The same mechanism that built these patterns in childhood is capable of gradually rebuilding new ones in adulthood. It's slower. It's not as simple as one insight fixing everything overnight, but it's absolutely possible, and it happens more often than people expect. One of the most important shifts tends to start with something surprisingly small. Noticing the internal voice in real time, not judging it, not immediately trying to silence it, just noticing it. Oh, there it is again. That's the old voice telling me I'm not enough. That tiny act of separation, of recognizing the thought as a pattern rather than a fact, begins to weaken its automatic grip. It sounds almost too simple to matter. But this is actually one of the foundational techniques used in cognitive behavioral therapy, because the mind can't automatically believe something it's actively examining. Here's another detail almost everyone misses. Self-compassion is not the same thing as self-indulgence, even though a lot of people confuse the two, especially people who grew up believing that being hard on themselves is what keeps them disciplined and successful. There's a common fear that if they stop criticizing themselves so harshly, they'll become lazy, entitled, or stop achieving anything. But research in this area actually shows the opposite pattern. People who practice self-compassion tend to be more resilient after failure, not less. They get back up faster, because they're not spending extra energy drowning in shame on top of the original mistake. Shame, it turns out, is a terrible motivator. It might create short burst performance, but over time, it burns people out and makes them more afraid of trying, not less. Think about a child learning to ride a bike. If every time they fall, someone screams at them for being clumsy, careless, and embarrassing, what happens? Most kids either give up entirely or they keep riding, but with a knot of anxiety in their stomach every single time, terrified of falling again. Compare that to a child who falls and hears, "That was a good try. Let's figure out what happened and try again." Which child do you think ends up more confident on that bike in 6 months? Which child do you think enjoys the process more, rather than just enduring it? Adults are not so different from that child. The way people talk to themselves after mistakes shapes not just their mood, but their actual long-term performance and willingness to keep trying. Now, here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. If you wouldn't say something to a friend, why is it acceptable to say it to yourself? Most people, when asked this question directly, immediately admit they never speak to a friend the way they speak to themselves internally. That gap alone reveals just how deeply this double standard is settled in, often without anyone ever consciously deciding it should be there. There's a simple but genuinely powerful exercise some therapists use, and it goes like this. The next time that harsh internal voice shows up, imagine just for a moment, that a close friend said the exact same thing to you about their own mistake. Not paraphrased, the exact same sentence. Then imagine how you'd respond to them. Chances are, your response would be warmer, more understanding, and far more reasonable than what you originally said to yourself. That contrast is not an accident. It's information. It's proof that somewhere inside, the capacity for a kinder, more accurate voice already exists. It's just been aimed outward instead of inward for a very long time. This is where it gets genuinely hopeful, because it means the compassion isn't missing. It's misdirected. Nobody has to build kindness from scratch. It's already there, fully developed, proven daily in how they treat friends, family, even strangers. The real work isn't creating something new. It's redirecting something that already exists, pointing it inward for the first time in years, maybe ever. Of course, this shift doesn't happen through one dramatic realization. It happens in small, repeated moments. Catching the harsh thought, pausing, asking, would I say this to someone I love? And then, even if it feels unnatural or a little forced at first, choosing a different sentence. Over time, these small moments accumulate into something bigger. The nervous system starts to learn, slowly, that safety doesn't actually depend on constant self-punishment, that a person can make a mistake and still be fundamentally okay, that love and acceptance don't have to be earned through relentless performance. It's also worth saying clearly that healing this pattern doesn't mean becoming less kind to other people. That fear shows up a lot too. This idea that if someone stops being so hard on themselves, they'll somehow become selfish or careless with others. In reality, the opposite tends to happen. When kindness stops being a survival strategy and becomes a genuine choice, it actually deepens. It becomes sustainable instead of exhausting. People stop giving from an empty, anxious place and start giving from a place that actually has something left to offer. Relationships built on that kind of grounded kindness tend to last longer and feel far less draining for everyone involved, including the person giving it. There's something almost poetic about this whole pattern. If you step back and look at it honestly, the very people who are most capable of deep compassion, who instinctively understand pain, patience, and forgiveness better than almost anyone, are often the ones who withhold every bit of that understanding from themselves. They spend their entire lives handing out grace to everyone except the one person who arguably needs it the most. And the tragedy is, most of them don't even realize they're doing it. It just feels like normal, everyday thinking. Just background noise. Just how they've always been. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Awareness really is the beginning of change here, uncomfortable as that awareness might feel in the moment. If any part of this described you, if you recognize yourself in the gap between how gently you treat others and how harshly you treat yourself, that recognition matters more than it might seem right now. It means the old pattern is finally becoming visible instead of invisible. And once something becomes visible, it can finally start to be questioned, challenged, and slowly, patiently rewritten. So maybe the real question isn't why some people are so kind to others while being so cruel to themselves. Maybe the real question is what would happen if they simply extended just a small fraction of that same kindness inward. Not perfectly, not overnight, just a little more than before, because the compassion is clearly already there. It's proven every single day in how they treat the people around them. It's just been pointed in the wrong direction for far too long, and redirecting it, even slightly, might be one of the most important shifts a person can ever make. If this gave you a new way of understanding yourself or someone you care about, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more videos like this one, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today.